Are you feeling distracted, maybe a bit fragmented? It seems that all the technology that helps us so much is also pulling upon us in lots of different ways. Today, we have an extraordinary mindset episode with Anthony Vicino. What I love about this episode is that he shares, one, he's a rock star multifamily investor and real estate investor extraordinary in general. He is also a fellow podcaster. But what Anthony also shares is how he has ADHD. ADHD, and he shares his childhood experience. And this conversation is so profound because we're walking around in the world of people who are feeling high levels of distraction. And Anthony and I, in this conversation, we end up unpacking so many tools, tips, strategies, whatever you want to call it, to help empower people to control those distractions around them. I hope you stick around and listen. We get really into the weeds on a lot of this and on how to become the next best version of yourself. His analogies will rock your world, and you're definitely going to want to understand what it means to +1 or -1 on the decisions in your life. Stick around for the whole episode and then share it around so that we can really help people overcome the disruptions in their life. If you haven't already subscribed or liked, reviewed, and all of that, would you please take just a moment? The podcast is free for you to listen to, but there is a cost of developing and releasing podcasts. So you know what? If you could just do me a favor and make sure that you are taking a step of one of those, just subscribe or drop a review for me or share it with somebody else. It makes all the difference in the world in this podcast growing organically, and it is huge wind in my sails as well. Welcome to the Ask Me How I Know show. I'm your host, Julie Holly, and I'm so excited you're here. Ask Me How I Know is the only podcast in the multifamily niche replicating what takes place outside the walls of a seminar. Remember when we used to get together like that? This is like the lobby where honest, unscripted conversations take place and transformation happens. We'll talk about practical problem solving in the multifamily niche as well as overcoming mental roadblocks. This episode is brought to you by 3 Keys Investments. 3 Keys Investments is dedicated to helping people like you, you, enter the multifamily investment space to build passive income and legacy wealth. If you haven't already subscribed and reviewed Ask Me How I Know, I'd be honored if you did. Thanks so much for joining me today, and now for our featured guest. Hey guys, welcome back to Ask Me How I Know. I am so excited. Anthony and I are both running late, which has worked out really well. And we both could have gotten away possibly with not letting each other know that we were running late too. Anthony, I am so excited to have you here on Ask Me How I Know.
I'm really psyched to be here. Honestly, like you could have kept me waiting all day. The waiting room is very nice. There's great magazines in here. So I just kept myself cozy. No, I was actually the one that was more late. So this is on me.
No, but I really like that point is that the virtual waiting rooms these days are very lovely because you're in the comfort of wherever you're at and you can continue to read and do whatever you need to do.
Exactly. I can multitask. I can be doing my emails. I can play on LinkedIn or Angry Birds. It doesn't matter. Angry Birds.
I haven't picked that up in a really long time.
I mean, either.
I have problems, addiction problems with games like that. So the dopamine release and everything like that is not good for me. So I stay away from it.
I'm in the same boat. I've never had any games on my phone because, you know, I have ADHD and we get very focused and addicted to stimuli. And so if I'm not careful about like games or TVs around me, I will be sucked in and lose an entire day.
I can understand that. I don't know that I've been ever diagnosed officially, but I can really relate to that. So here you are, this rockstar investor, podcaster, and you have all these other great accolades about you. But I'm wondering, how do you accomplish that with ADHD? How did you
That's a really good question. That's a heavy one too, because let's like to really unpack this. Like you have to go back to when I was really, really young. I was 6 years old. My teachers went to my parents and said, Anthony's struggling in school. He's distracted. He's falling behind. He's not learning. We're afraid, something might be wrong. So they had me tested and they came back and I have ADHD and they gave me Ritalin. And for the next 10 years, I was on Ritalin. And for most people, that drug serves as a stimulant, helps you focus. But for me, it put me into what's known as a hyper-focus state, where I was just locked into my brain and I would focus for hours on whatever you put in front of me. And the drug had a side effect for me, which was that it took all my energy. It made me very lethargic. So I was I didn't have any energy to do much. And so I would just sit around and I would read books, I would play chess and I'd play these games. I would just focus intently. And so when I was 16, my parents gave me the option of going off the drug. I said, okay, I'm never going back on that because I felt trapped. I felt prisoner to my brain and my body. I couldn't control either of them. But when I went off the drug, then I was 16 and I didn't have like any of the systems or the processes, the habits that would allow me to control my quirky brain. And so for the next like 10 years, I really struggled. I struggled in school. I struggled in work. I was fired from pretty much every job that I had because I was unreliable. I was unfocused. I was lazy. And I had a really hard time with relationships. And throughout this all, like inside, Maslow talks about how we all have this sense that there's greatness in us, right? That none of us really think that we're average. Nobody believes they're put on this planet just to be mundane and mediocre. We all think there's greatness in us. But the problem is when we're not moving towards that greatness, we feel it. And it makes us sad or discontent or frustrated or angry. And I felt that like constantly. I felt like I wasn't living up to what I knew I could be. And so I was studying psychology and the behaviors of people who were like succeeding in life. And I was like, okay, what's working for these people? And I would try it. And most of what I tried would fail. A lot of it didn't work. But I believe that we like fail our way to success. So I just kept trying things, kept failing, would get one little success and boom, I would put it over here and then I would try something else. And I would just keep stacking those little successes. And then one day, it almost feels like one day, it's like compound interest. Like compound interest doesn't do a lot until all of a sudden it hits this inflection point. And then suddenly it's doing a lot. And for me, that was what my life did. Like all of a sudden I hit this inflection point where the habits and the routines, the systems that I had been building around myself, they finally clicked. And I was able to use that hyper-focused state now at will. I could go in and out of it because I understood how to control my environment in a way that allowed me to use that what was previously a weakness and use it as a strength. And so it was a really long journey to get to that place. But now that I'm there, it's actually, it's a blessing in disguise, all that struggling, because I know what it's like to feel distracted and feel discontent when you're not pursuing like the greatness inside of you. And I think a lot of us, whether you have ADHD or not, I think a lot of us struggle with that. So that's part of what I try to do now is share that part of my story, because hopefully it connects with somebody and gives them some insight about like how they could maybe structure their existence in a way that might get the most out of it.
Okay, we got to go into this a little bit deeper than that, because this affects far more people than I think. I think this is one of those shadows that a lot of people don't even want to talk about. And I think in the adult sphere, it just seems like why would I tell somebody I'm ADHD? I don't want to bring this up. And I don't know, I'm not going to label anybody, but I would imagine that there might be some, shame, embarrassment or something, because the struggle for adults, the struggle wasn't just, I'm an adult and now I'm facing this struggle. It's, I have endured this struggle my entire life. So can we go back to childhood and everything? Because when I was a classroom teacher, we had a lot of trauma training. And I would imagine that there would be trauma involved with, just all of the negativity that is thrown at you as a kid because of something you have no control over. Like,
yeah, there's two things really at play here that made things very, very difficult when I was young. One was my mom. And so my dad was in the military, so to give some context. And so he was gone a lot. And she was home alone with me and my sisters. And, when I'm off the wall, I'm hard to control. And so the Ritalin, that was a blessing in disguise for her, because now it made me very controllable, very, just zonked out, I would say. But the times when I would go off of the medication, like when it would wear off, I would get rambunctious. And what she had been trained and taught to do in those moments where I was uncontrollable was just to wrap her arms and legs around me like a big human straitjacket and just hold me until I thrashed all my energy out. And that just made me feel incredibly trapped. So when I was on the drug, I felt trapped by my body, my brain. When I was off the drug, I felt trapped by my loved ones. And so that was very difficult. And then the other side of it was my dad never actually acknowledged or recognized that this was a legitimate thing. So he was just like, no, your mother just is, you know, and parents, they eventually got divorced for reasons that are very good because they did not get along very well. But, you know, there was a lot of blame placing, saying, oh, this is a diagnosis just because you can't control him, blah, 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 blah. And all of like through this all, then there was like this dichotomy, this friction of like, okay, my dad doesn't accept that there's something wrong with me. When I'm on the drug, I don't feel right. When I'm off the drug, things don't go right. And so there was all this just negativity tied into having this thing. And honestly, like the best parts of my life were when I would go in summer times, I would go out to my grandparents' ranch in Idaho. And I think you're from Idaho, right?
Yes, I am.
So I would spend every summer in Idaho on the ranch, and my grandparents would let me off the drug and they would just let me run free. Like we had horses, we had chickens, we had ducks, we had a raspberry bush. And so I would just run. And like, it's okay when you have ADHD in that environment because you're just running and exploring and having fun. But there was definitely something different about how I processed the world. So I needed help. And it was really unfortunate because I think that friction between my parents made it so that I was never given the tools that I needed, maybe from an authority figure that would help me kind of structure my life in a way that would be helpful. And so it took me a long time to figure that out on my own. And that's okay. I think, honestly, at the end of the day, it makes it more impactful when it was something that I had to uncover for myself, because I don't know if there would have been just kind of a script somebody could have handed me and said, this will work for you.
Right.
But I think a lot of people struggle because whether they're in school and they're like, is this legitimate? Is there something different about me? Am I weird? Like, these are real concerns that we have. And even as an adult now, honestly, guys, like our digital existence is designed in a way to distract us, to keep us, like to put us into funnels, whether it's on social media or emails or, you know, whatever it is, all the notifications on our phone. It's designed to make us feel like we have ADHD, like we can't focus. And then we go into these deep modes when we're scrolling to find the bottom of the Facebook wall. So I think it's something that everybody these days is struggling with. So I don't know if it's unique to people that just have ADHD anymore. I think we're all living in a world of fragmented attention.
Okay, that is really, I don't know if you realize, but that puts you in a very unique position to serve the world in an especially good way, because you've had to go through the struggle and the pain of figuring out how to focus. And now we live in, as you pointed out, this world where, you know, people are now struggling with all these focus and fragments. So what are some of the tools? Like, how do you maintain focus?
The biggest thing is it all comes down to habits and routines. Like there's truth in the statement that discipline leads to freedom. And so if you can exert discipline and create structures around yourself, that's where creativity and where productivity can really thrive. And so the first thing that I had to figure out was my mornings. Like, how do I win the morning so that sets me up to win the day? And that took a lot of figuring out. And then, you know, Hal Elrond has his miracle morning. Like everybody talks about how peak performers have these routines that they do in the morning. And there's truth in it. It's not the same for everybody. There are some elements I think that are consistent throughout that if you want to design like a good morning routine, that will be helpful. But that's step one, is like really getting your morning figured out. And then from there, I'm all about time blocking. That's the big one, is like really figuring out what I'm doing with every minute of my day. Because if it's not allocated beforehand, and I have to figure out in the moment what I should be doing, like what's the highest and best use of my time in this moment, I'm going to default and make a bad decision. And so it's like, how do we maximize our willpower so that our willpower isn't depleted making decisions between, should I play on Facebook or YouTube, or should I write this book? Like, if I've already made that decision, say the night before, then it's not a decision that needs to be made anymore. Now it's just an application of discipline, will I actually keep the word, the promise that I made to myself, which was, I'm going to do this thing. And if we can tie our identity to this idea of I'm the type of person who keeps my word, whether that's to other people or to ourselves. And I think far too often, the easiest promises to break are the ones that we make to ourselves.
Okay, so much there. One, I have to dumb down the conversation for a second and say, this is me going to the grocery store and lots of other people hungry. Like, just don't go to the grocery store hungry. You're going to make bad decisions. And it's similar to what you're saying with allocating your time for the day. Like, you know, your best decisions are made when you're clear-minded and you lay it out. But moving on to what you're saying about those decisions and the promises that we make to ourselves. Isn't it interesting? What do you think that relationship? Let's dive into that relationship a little bit, because it seems to me that, well, right now, my audience knows that I'm not drinking wine, which is like crazy for the year of 2021.
Oh, for the whole year.
For the whole year. Yeah, exactly. You're like, oh yeah, good for you,
cool.
Julie. Yeah, cool, whatever. No. I gave up wine for the entire year. And
all right,
there have been times.
That's legit. Yeah.
It's legit. And I dropped this. I didn't have to. I dropped it right before Thanksgiving. And so, which was really dumb on my part. I'll just be honest. I'm like, why did I do that before the holidays? That was really foolish. But nonetheless, you know, keeping that, maintaining that has been hard. And there have been the moments, even as recently as last week, where it's like, I just love a glass of wine. I just want to have a glass of wine. It calms me. It's like, you know, there's a lot of psychology that's involved. I've gone into it on a podcast episode on habits. And it was a habit that I had developed. All this to say is that that promise that I made to myself and the accountability I have to a friend of mine who doesn't even realize the power of the accountability, because I respect that friend so much. You know, it's like having that. But I just was like, I don't want to do this. I made this promise to myself. And if I disappoint myself, if I compromise that for this, it's going to lead to other compromises that I don't want in my life. But what does that mean to you? Like, when you think about promises to yourself, and how do you maintain those?
It's a long journey, I think, because, you know, we were talking about this before we went on the air, that, you know, reputation, or rather self-esteem is a reputation that you have with yourself. And reputation is one of those things that takes a really long time to build, but it just takes one decision to wipe out entirely. And then you're back to square one, rebuilding. And it's difficult, I think, when you're trying to form habits, if what you're trying to do requires great willpower. In the instance of like not drinking wine, it's not something that you're maybe writing off for the rest of your life and saying, I'm not going to drink wine anymore. I'm not a wine drinker. So there's still part of you that identifies as a wine drinker. So there's always this conflict now, which is you want this thing, but you're holding yourself back from this thing because the discipline and like the making the hard decision is better for you in the long run. And that's always hard, because humans, we're self-gratifying animals. Like we want to be gratified in the moment, but we're also animals that live inherently in the future. It's what makes us so unique, in that we're able to plan and understand that the consequences of our decisions now impact how we're going to live in 1 year and 5 years from now. And so you have to keep that future vision of yourself firm in mind of who am I becoming? Who is that person? And delaying the gratification now of, oh, I'm just going to have the wine. It's summarized, I think, very well by a guy named Jerzy. I can't think of his last name. He's a Polish bodybuilder who says, easy choices, hard life. Hard choices, easy life. And so if you can make it so that you frame it in a way that says, hey, I'm the type of person who seeks out uncomfortable situations, who seeks out moments of growth and change and challenge. Then every time you have that hankering for wine, you look at it and it's no longer a decision between, do I drink the wine or don't I? Now you look at it and you say, this is a moment for me to embrace the discomfort, to prove that I'm the type of person who rises to the challenge. And that's a vote for your future you, that person that you are dreaming of becoming. It's like, going back to Maslow, he has this theory of the +1 or the -1, which is if you think about your ideal self, like the best version of yourself that you could be, and you put that person on a road, and in front of them, there's all these signs in the distance that say +1, +2, +3, +4. And if they turn around, those signs say -1, -2, -3, -4. For every decision that you have to make in your day, if you view it through the lens of, is this a +1 or a -1 decision, then you can just take it in the moment and say, is this moving me forward, or is this moving me backwards towards my ideal self or my less than ideal self? And this might be like a really grandiose exercise, but I find it really impactful when it comes to like, do I want that wine? And you just take the moment to like pattern interrupt and say, what's my outcome? Is this a +1 or is this a -1 decision? And then it makes it become really easy, because you're like, that's a -1 decision. And future me, I can't be the best version of me by making -1 decisions.
That is such a cool, it's a tangible way, even though it's not really tangible, but I mean, like, it's a very, like, you can visualize this, you can see this. That's amazing. It's an amazing representation is what that is. I know that part of that decision for, is looking at those layers of like who you are becoming. And I can now see that on that whole +1 type thing. It's like, if you were looking down that road at all those +1s, it's like, what is the one around the bend? There's another +1 sign. And I want to see that +1 sign, but to see that +1 sign, I have to like +1 all these times. And every time you +1, you're becoming like that next iteration of yourself. And it's like, oh, this is really cool. I want to keep going. I want to see the next person.
Yeah. And think about this, Julie. For every +1 decision you make, you get to move forward 1. But for every -1 decision you make, you actually go back 2, because you've lost the opportunity to move forward with that decision. So now you're 2 behind. So every negative decision actually moves you 2 back, because you drink the wine, right? Let's say you do that. That's actually 1, you broke the promise to yourself. And that's a big -1. The second -1 is, for whatever reason, you decided not to drink wine anymore. Maybe it's empty calories, or you wanted to break the addiction, or whatever it was. So there was an underlying reason that you didn't want to drink the wine anymore. And you gave up on both of those +1s in that moment. And now you have to work even harder to get back to where you were. And so that's easy to say. Like, we do this all the time. We're self-destructive creatures sometimes, where we go, future Julie be damned, I'm drinking this wine. She'll figure it out tomorrow.
YOLO.
Exactly. But then, you flip that on the head and you're like, yeah, but you do only live once. Like, you do only get this one shot. You only, in this moment, get to make the decision one time. Am I going to drink that wine or not drink the wine? And tomorrow you might have to make that decision again. But right now, in this moment, you only get one shot at it.
Mind blown. I just love how visual this is. And I'm thinking that this can make a lot of practical sense for a lot of people in the decisions that they're making. For me, I'm trying to do a pattern disrupt in my life. Like, I like disruption. I didn't realize I liked it until, like the last year and a half. I'm like, disruption actually serves everybody really well. We get into these habits and we become complacent, and the next thing you know, we're just going through the motions, and we have got to constantly be finding ways to disrupt that so that we're not complacent and that we're growing and pushing.
I'm curious then. So like, how do we do that? Like, how do we identify those patterns that we can disrupt? Because we become so like ingrained in them that we don't even realize that it's a pattern anymore. So like, how did you identify those?
Well, okay. And to go on with that is that some of these patterns are actually habits that serve us really well, right? Our morning routines are habits that serve us well. They keep our day on track. Our time blocking and how we do that keeps us on track so that we can be successful and become the future version of ourselves that we like envision and everything. So that's a really profound question, because how do you identify which habits should stay and which habits should go? Where does the disruption need to take place?
That's a tricky one, and this one came like full in my face about 2 weeks ago. And I was talking with a friend, and he was like, I think that we've started to bastardize the idea of gratitude, because we've turned it into a to-do list, a checklist that we just, we all write down in the morning. We do our gratitude journal because we know peak performers all have gratitude practice because it boosts productivity by 33% and all these things. And so I'm going to say, I'm grateful for this pen, and I'm grateful for these headphones, and I'm grateful for this water, but I'm not really identifying with the actual gratitude. I don't feel it. And I've been falling into that. Like I fall into that routine of I just need to check the box and do the thing. But then when I reflect on it, I'm like, I don't feel grateful. Like I'm putting these things down and I have a really like I inherently struggle to feel grateful. I think some people are really naturally prone to it. I'm not. Like I really, really struggle with it. So to sit and try to like dig for something that I'm truly grateful for makes me uncomfortable, first of all. Like maybe that's just a me thing, maybe it's an everybody thing, but it makes me really uncomfortable to like dig there.
Does it feel disingenuous? Like absolutely. Why do I have to dig so hard? What's wrong with me? Or is it I'm disingenuous because I'm not just grateful for this?
I think there's a lot of, what brought this to the surface was I was reading something during my morning readings from Confucius, which was one of the 5 virtues that you need to have to live a great life. One of those was sincerity. And sincerity is really defined, by, not being hypocritical and, like being genuine. And I didn't feel genuine as I'm going through this morning routine of like feeling grateful and writing these things down. I'm like, I don't really feel grateful. So then it was like a double whammy where I felt like an imposter, like I was being a hypocrite, like I was just forcing it. And so then as I sit and I'm like, okay, find something that you're really grateful for. It's hard and it's uncomfortable. And then that makes me feel like I'm doing it wrong. And that like why I have so many things that I should be grateful for. I can just look around me in this room and like spot everything, all of it. I should be grateful. And I don't feel it necessarily unless I really dig for it.
There's a lot more there. There's so much more in that. My mind just scattered into a lot of different directions, quite frankly, because I feel like a lot of people are resonating with that and that concept of having to go through the motions. Like I have to do this. And so why do we feel like we have to do this? Like I understand all I understand that the science, but we feel that we have to produce something as if we're producing it and it's getting checked off by somebody else. You know what I mean? Like, okay, so hey Anthony, I did my gratitude, it's done. But nobody else is looking at it. So then why is it that we have all these feelings deep inside us when really it's just us?
The way I think about that, I haven't stopped to like pull back and reflect on this, but the first thing I think about is that for me, my harshest critic has always been myself. And one of the things that served me really well in all avenues of life is that I don't really benchmark myself off of other people. I benchmark myself off of what I know I'm capable of. And so if I know I can do a thing, then that's the standard that I hold myself to. And I'm competing against who I know I could be. And so I think for me, that checklist, as I'm going through it, I'm comparing myself to like what that ideal version of myself would be doing. But here's the problem is that we're not omniscient beings. We don't have like perfect clarity about like what the best version of us is actually doing and checking off the list. And so we're benchmarking off of ourselves. That's not off something that's not necessarily founded in reality in any kind of way. And so that's a little bit how I feel about it. Like as I think about, reading a book, like what's the point of even setting a goal of reading so many books in a year? Like nobody cares. Nobody's going to see that. Like, but I care for some reason. I care. And I don't know why that is.
I think that's interesting. And I think that would be really interesting on your podcast that's coming out on Brain Dump. I think that would be a very interesting deep dive because what is it that's driving people to want to go into that? Like, why do I have to read a book a week? Why do I have to, like, what am I trying to prove? Okay, I'm not trying to, similar to you, I don't find gratification by proving things to other people. I really just want to be my very best self. So what is it within me that is requiring this?
I think what we'll have to do, Julie, is we're going to have you on Brain Dump, and then we're going to have to go and spend a couple hours on this topic at least, because I think it's so deeply ingrained in a lot of the discontent that so many of us feel in this, this drive to achieve and to be perfect, or like whatever that even means. But I think by uncovering that, we can get closer to at least understanding ourselves better. And at the end of the day, that's what this is all about for me, is how do I understand who I am in this world better? I think as Aristotle or somebody that said the unexamined life isn't worth living. And I think our highest calling is to really understand our truest selves, because it's by understanding that we can then manifest whatever our greatness is. And through that greatness, then we can serve the world around us in the greatest way possible. But that all starts with answering these really hard questions of like, why do I care so much about this thing or that thing? Or like, why am I identifying? Why am I going through these motions? What is it that I hope to get? And I don't have the answers, unfortunately.
I think it's definitely a worthwhile topic to contemplate, because it would unearth at least potential disruption that could serve everyone well. And going back to one of the questions that you said is, how do you identify, areas in your life that need to be disrupted? Part of that, I think, is internal. I think that we naturally know some of the areas where we need to disrupt it. And we're in denial oftentimes. And so, I really don't love drinking water very much. It doesn't, I just really don't
taste very good.
I'm not a huge water fan. I'll never do 75 hard because I don't want to drink a gallon or 2 gallons or 5 or whatever it is. And I don't want to take cold showers. But all that to say, but I'm drinking it because I know it's going to serve me really well. I made the choice on wine because I'm like, something inside of me was telling me this isn't serving me well. Like there's something going on. And so how close are we to that inner voice? This is interesting. We're very attached to our inner critic. Most people are super like BFF, blood bond with the inner critic, but we're not that tight with our inner conscience. And we're also not that tight with the praise, where's the inner cheerleader? Like we kind of hold those
we don't talk to them.
No, I'm pretty sure we don't. So that's so funny. So I think that listening to that inner voice and that intuition, what the instinct, the conscious, there are lots of ways that it could be expressed, but listening to that with every little thing that you're doing, almost like Emerson, just walking quietly in the woods, like hear yourself, hear what yourself is trying to tell you so that you can respond and pull some weeds out, or at least just shake the tree. You know what? You could shake the tree and the apples are going to fall down. The apples are good for you. They're really good. So sometimes disruption doesn't mean that it has to be something bad, because good things come when you shake the apple tree, but you had to shake the tree.
Yeah, it's interesting that internal critic, we are so good at listening to it that after a certain point for all of us, we just start to associate with it and say, that is my natural voice. That is who I believe I am. It's no longer a critic. It's just me. And we hear from that cheerleader so infrequently that when we do hear it, it feels very awkward. It feels forced and foreign. And we're like, who is that? That doesn't feel authentic like me. No. And it's safer to go back to the critic. What you're talking about, the pattern disruptions and how you can identify those things that don't seem like they're serving you. This is an idea from Nassim Taleb called via negativa, where it's easier to know a thing by its opposite and like what not to do. And so instead of saying like, how do you get rich? Ask yourself first, like, how do you not be poor? Like, how do you not go broke? Like we can start to pretty easily peg that one, be like, well, don't spend all your money, and maybe you should have a job, and maybe you should, do all these things. But we can know a thing much easier when we focus on like what's not serving us, and maybe start there. And if you can look at your day or week or month and identify all those things, big and small, that when you look at, you're like, you know what, that's not a +1. That one's actually a -1 that I kind of have been fooling myself or allowing myself to ignore, because we do that all the time. Like, oh, I've earned this. I do this for the last 2 months. It's like, oh, I earned that mocha. I earned this one because I took my cold shower. I did my push-ups and I did my meditation. I earned that mocha. And it's like, yeah, but like, did you really make a +1 decision there only so that you could justify making a -1 over here? And like, yeah, I did.
There's a lot of truth to that for a lot of people.
Yeah. And that's all to say it's a process.
Right. But, and you know what though, is there a healthy exchange? And when is it really and when is the mocha a -1?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like maybe the mocha is a +1 because, sorry, mind bend for a second here, Anthony, but maybe that mocha is a +1 because of the previous +1s that you made. And you're like, yeah, I'm celebrating.
Yeah. Yeah. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's about intentionality. It's about, why are you engaging with that? Are you choosing to engage with the wine because you chose it and because it's, you know, a reward or whatever? Like, great. But are you choosing it because it's convenient, it's easy, it's comfortable? It's all about the reason behind it, the intention.
Yes.
The intention matters.
100%. That is a huge, that is the element behind that decision right there, is what is driving this decision. And until you know what's driving a decision, if you're unsure about what's driving a decision, that's a great time to pump the brakes and say, wait, what's driving this decision? Let's just pause right here, park the car, and figure out before we keep driving down the road.
That's exactly right. So a couple of years ago, I implemented what I talk about as being the best habit I ever introduced into my life, which was I set these random alarms on my phone to go off throughout the day. And it came with a question. The question was, what's my outcome? So at random points throughout the day, the alarm would go off. I would look at my phone. It would say, what's my outcome? And it would force me to stop in whatever I'm doing and reflect, like, why am I doing this thing that I'm doing right now? It was a pattern interrupt. And so if I was driving my car, I'm like, why am I driving? Where am I going? What's my goal right now? What am I trying to achieve? Or if I'm going into a meeting with somebody, what's my outcome? Why am I going in there? What is it that in a perfect world we achieve together? Like, what's that outcome? And when you know what that is, then you're much more likely to find it through that task. But quite often we just go through the motions. We're habit creatures, and we go on automation, and we don't know what our outcome is. And so we do all these things. And then at the end of the day, we look back and it's like, what did I do today? What did I really achieve? And it's like, I don't really know. Like, if something went wrong, you can point that out really easily. But if something went right, it gets a little bit harder to know that. And so that was a really critical habit for me at where I was in my life, because I found I was always just going into things without any clear intention. I knew vaguely what I wanted to get out of it, but I wasn't getting as much as I could.
Intentionality is king. Oh, wow. It's changing my life. I've been choosing a different planner this year, and just that level of every 30 minutes knowing exactly where that time is being and how it's being accounted for. It's a game changer, and it's a process. It's not always perfect. And I'm a recovering perfectionist. So I'm fine with like, it's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy, but even just striving towards that and giving myself grace along the way, but striving towards it, I'm getting further along in that compound effect, you know, that you kind of mentioned earlier. I mean, that's taking place just by holding myself accountable for that time.
These decisions, they add up. I'm curious, you know, when we talk about time blocking or scheduling our days out and being rigid and that, you know, one of the natural pushbacks that people have is like, oh, I could never do that. Like that. I don't like to have so much control over my day. I want to leave my life open to serendipity. Or
what if something happens? I always get interrupted by my business. Like, I have to be available for my business phone calls.
What do you say? What do you say to that? Like, or how do you handle that? Because it's true, right? Like I time block every day because it's a great habit. But most of my days do not go exactly how I time block them.
I don't know what you're talking about. Jeez, Anthony, give it a program.
Okay, well, we need that redacted, what I just said. So audio done. Person, whoever, just go ahead and just take that last bit out. I did not admit that I was failing.
No. So actually, this is interesting. I was talking with Logan Freeman, and I were talking about this recently. And the concept was, he went back, his fallback. So I'm going to go to this and then I'll go to mine, but his fallback is the 80-20 rule. Like, what do I really, end of the day, bottom, like, this has to get done. And so knowing like, what are my top priorities? So I have a similar thing. I haven't read the 80-20 rule. It is on my list to read this year, but I have that same thing. Like, at the end of the day, absolutely, these three things must get done. And so knowing that, so then I have the other items on my schedule that they're scheduled throughout my day. If something happens, and guess what? I mean, I have a business, I have a podcast, I have kids that are in a virtual school program that, you know, I help, and I have a lot of things going on in life. So yeah, sometimes interruptions happen, but I know that those three things are going to get done at the end of by the end of the day. They're going to get done come hell or high water. And some of those other items that my daughter needs help with math longer, and that just bled into when I was going to work on this task. Here's how that benefits by time blocking and scheduling things out. And I do it on Sundays. I map out my entire week because I just need to see the flow. I have lots of moving parts. So I need to see, well, when am I going to actually, and this is new to my life, when am I actually going to work on that project? I said I want to do that. I said I wanted to write that ebook. I said I wanted to do this. Those are all great things to say. It means nothing unless you actually do them. So I'm going to put it over here. I have this, you know, hour of time. I'm going to start working on it here. And this is what I'm going to work on that project. Well, now my daughter needs help with math. Okay. I intended to use that, but that wasn't like one of my must do's for that day. So guess what? That's going to get tabled over and recalibrated in somewhere else. That's, you know, it's probably an uncouth way of doing it. So, but so far it's working.
I love it. I think it's perfect. Honestly, the 80-20, I have a very similar approach to my days, which is every day I write out so we time block everything, but within that, it's like, okay, what are the top 3 things? Cause if I'm not careful, I'll make like 5 or 7 top important things. And that's impossible on any given day. Like you're probably more high achieving than I am, but on a good day, I can really only accomplish maybe 5 really meaningful things. Maybe it's, if I can get 3, that's a great day. 5 is like extraordinary. So like 3 is my number of like, what are those 3 most important things that if I got done today, they were going to move my life, my business forward, my relationships. What are those 3 things? And then do the hard things first. Like, don't push those things off until the end of the day, because we know what happens when we do that, unless you work best at the end of the day. If you're a night owl, okay, fine. But for most of us, like by the end of our day, our willpower is drained, our creative energy is in the toilet. So we have to do those hard things first. And once you get those out of the way, and this is why my morning routine, like I have a part of my morning routine, an hour of just working on the most important thing for that day. And by the time I'm done with that, it doesn't really matter what happens for the rest of the day, because I got that one really big win, and it was the most important win. And so I can be happy with that.
I love that, you know what, I have a power-packed morning routine, and that right there, it touches base with the most important things in my life. And it, just like you were saying, it just feels like the rest of the day can play out how it's going to play out. Here's the ideal day right here. Here's what I, you know, need to have happen, want to have happen, all of that. But the chunk of it, the most important thing, done, check.
It feels so good when you get that done early in the day. It's like a weight off of your chest from that moment forward. And you can be proud of like the effort that you put in. It's like, you know, living in alignment with your best self. And you're like, huh, I think I did it for that little bit of chunk there.
Right? Swallow the dog, swallow the dog, swallow the frog.
Yeah, we don't recommend eating the dogs here. No, we're dog people. Nope.
Other countries, that might be the expression, but here we'll say swallow the frog.
Yeah, we're not a frog-friendly nation, but we love our dogs.
Yeah, exactly. Oh gosh. Okay, so we're going to have to wrap this up here in just a few minutes, but I want to go back and make sure that we have, going back to full circle with, you know, just some of your strategies to prevent the distraction and to maintain the focus or to regain focus. You've got your morning routine, you've got your time block. Are there any suggestions, recommendations, or anything else that you have that serves you well? And also I'm going to, because I know you can manage like 5 questions at once or more, you know, redirects when distractions happen. How do you redirect?
So Yeah, the first one in terms of strategies, I think it's all about, again, the intentionality and recognizing that you're about to go off the rails. Usually when we procrastinate, it's because we're moving away from stress in some way. Like the idea of what we're going to work on, it causes us stress and anxiety. It's like your alarm goes off in the morning and you're stressed at the idea of getting out of bed. So you push snooze and you stay in there. And so what you need to do is you need to you need to be able to separate yourself from that moment of anxiety and stress. You need to be able to recognize it, because once you pull the monsters out of the closet so that you can see them in the light, they're no longer quite as scary. So if you can pull that procrastination monster out of the closet and look at it and realize, okay, you're not so scary, I can do this. And you start small then. And you set yourself, I think Mel Robbins, she talks about how she counts down from 5. She goes 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You give yourself those 5 seconds to feel the stress, to procrastinate for those 5 seconds. But then once you hit 1, it's go time. It's time to start doing the thing. And once you do that, once you've gone through that pattern interrupt and you actually take that first step, it makes all the subsequent steps that much easier. Because as Woody Allen said, 80% of success in life is just showing up. And that's showing up for the things that you said you were going to do. You just have to show up. Whether that's, hey, I told myself I was going to write this book and now I'm staring at a blank page. Hey, good for you. You showed up. You're staring at the blank page. Sit there and stare at it for however long you told yourself you're going to stare at it. Maybe eventually start putting some words down. But for now, you just showed up. And then I've added on the other 20% of success is doing what you said you would. So show up and do what you said you would. So if you show up, you open the book and you look at it and then you follow through and say, I'm going to start writing. And you just start doing that. You've kept your word to yourself. And that makes all the difference at the end of the day. And so when you feel that procrastination, you need to recognize it. And that was the pattern interrupt of what's my outcome, those alarms, because so often we do a very bad job of catching ourselves in the moment. This is where different apps that measure how long you spend on different platforms, those can maybe be helpful because they can give you a bird's eye view of like, oh, wow, you spend 3 hours on Facebook per day. Okay, that's a wake-up call. But it's really hard when you're in the moment to recognize it sometimes. So maybe one of the things that I did in the early days of trying to wean myself off of social media when I'm trying to work is putting on, different timers that limit how long I can spend on social media or on different websites, or just disconnecting the router when it's time to do a thing that doesn't require the internet. And just that little bit of like extra step of course, I could always go plug it back in.
Right.
I can always go turn it back on. Of course you can do that. The point is to give yourself as wide a gap to notice what you're doing and stop yourself and go, I don't need to make that decision. Because usually It just happens so quickly. And then we're into the thing that we didn't want to be doing in the first place.
Oh, that is truth right there. And that's a healthy habit as well. Just unplug for a little bit.
We need it. Our brains need it. We're not born. There's nothing in our evolution that designed us to live on screens, connected to the internet, connected to social media, in both it's this really interesting simultaneously connected and disconnected state where we feel connected, and the more content that we see, the more disconnected we feel. It's a very strange disconnect.
It really is. And I think once you start releasing or just interfering with that dopamine release that comes with all of the stimulation that we are engaged with, and bombarded with, it's like, if you can disconnect and, start shifting that chemical, the physiological chemical balances and everything, that's a huge difference in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other side of that too is, Tony Robbins talks a lot about state shifts and changing just your physical state. That's the easiest way. If you need to change your mood, your physiology follows your biology or something like that, or emotions follow biology. And it's true. Like if you are feeling low energy and like you just lethargic, you don't want to do the task in front of you, you might just need to change your state for a minute. Maybe that's go meditate, or maybe that's get up and do jumping jacks, or get up and do a crazy dance, or just start, I don't know, be like Tony Robbins and beat your chest and yell at the wall. I don't know, like do something that interrupts like whatever is happening. Because if you're sitting in a state and you're like, I don't really feel like doing that thing that I told myself I need to be doing, like at some point you decided that you wanted to do that thing. So it's about finding the state in which it would allow you or enable you to tackle it full on. And so be cognizant of that. Maybe keep a journal and figure out, like, when do you do your best work? Like, what is happening in your environment around you? Is it the sun is coming through the blinds in a perfect way and it's hitting me in the face and I feel great and it feels warm? Or do I have music going, or do I have my space heater? Like, what are those things in your environment that you can control to put you in the right state of mind? And I think we don't spend enough time thinking about those things generally.
I would agree with that. And I'm going to add that I don't know if you do this, but I am conscientious about some of those things in creating them and saying, you know what, this is a really healthy, this is a vehicle that will help me out. So I use music like that all the time. It's like, okay, how am I feeling? What do I need to be feeling in order, what am I writing about? If I'm writing, what am I writing about? What do I need to be feeling? What do I need to draw out? So like figuring out whatever medium it is that can help draw or put you in that state is super duper powerful.
It is. Music is incredible. I want to share, I don't share this too much, or I haven't shared it in many, many years. So I used to be a science fiction and fantasy author, and each book that I wrote over 12 novels. Each one has a soundtrack associated with it. A soundtrack that when I sat down and decided, what's this story? What's the theme? What are the emotions I want to invoke? I went and created like the music score that you would see when you go see the movie. And I would take those and I would play them. And I wouldn't necessarily play them as I'm writing, but I would play them before I was going into a chapter. And I would say, this chapter needs to evoke this emotion, which this song is going to do. And I would listen to it. And so each book is really, if you knew what that soundtrack was and then you read those books, you'd be like, oh, I see this. I feel that. Like, and it is a way of like putting me in the right state to tell the story that I knew was there. And it can work with everything, whether it's real estate or it's, relationships. Like, figure out what those external stimuli are that can help get you into that right state.
Yeah, 100%. I do have a space heater right down here. Yep. And sometimes it's cranking it on. And sometimes it's knowing that if it's going to be really cold, I'm going to crank that thing on. So that first thing, yep, I am going to pay a little bit more on my electrical bill. But the first thing that happens when I walk into my studio is I'm not that cold, as we say. Mm-hmm. And you're in a cold place, so you get it. Yep. I need to walk in and I need it to be warm and cozy and just like nurturing, because that's going to help me I like to stay in a relaxed state if I can. So that's going to help me just like engage everything around me and be calm. So
like my office design, it's designed in a way where I can change the lighting to change the mood, right? Like I can change these bulbs, I can like dim them, I can make them yellow or blue, depending on the time of the day, the time of the mood. And I can put myself into different states. It's like, now it's time to be relaxed and comfortable. Now it's time to be, we need to be going. It's time to put the desk in stand mode. It's time to get going, and I think people in the North, like, we always have a space heater within arm's reach. So I got my
see,
he's right here.
It's almost like Alexa, except like we need to have a space heater that's like Alexa, where it's like 85 degrees, please.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, that you're from the North when you name your space heater. Mine's name is Aiden, which means light. He is the light in my life because he makes it warm.
Oh my gosh. I have not named, but granted, I've only been in the North for this is my 5th winter. So
I like naming things. I'm weird like that. I like to personify things because I don't know, maybe it's like the storyteller side of me, but things just have more personality when they have a name associated with them.
They really do. That's a lot of fun. Anthony, we have to wrap things up. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I just enjoy dialogue with you in general on LinkedIn, over here, your podcast, because it's insightful and meaningful. I know that we haven't spoken, sweet audience, we haven't spoken about multifamily investing, but you should know Anthony is a rock star investor, and you need to check out all of his things. But why don't you give a plug for current podcast and podcast that's coming out, podcast number 2, and where to connect with you?
Yeah. So podcast number one, if you want to, I do real estate. So if you want to learn more about that, we have a podcast called Multifamily Investing Made Simple, and Julie was on it, and it was fantastic. We had some internet issues, but we got through it, and it was fantastic. And the point of that show is just to show like, hey, this thing, it is big, it is scary, but it's not complicated. It can be made simple, and everybody can participate. Here's how. The other thing is we have a podcast coming out next week. I don't know when this episode will go live, so maybe this is in the past now, but it's called Brain Dump. And so we're talking about the psychology of success, mindset, setting peak performers, and people that have just done things that we find really awesome and we want to learn from them. And so everything that we talked about in today's episode, Julie, this was like the best real estate, non-real estate podcast yet, because we didn't really talk about real estate. We talked about all the things that if you don't get it right, the real estate investing doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Right? Like this is the foundation. It's the mindset. So check out that podcast when it comes out. It's called The Brain Dump. And then if you want to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram. I'm everywhere.
Everywhere. So
Literally.
You are omnipotent.
Yes. But I don't usually, lead with that.
Right. Right, exactly. I kind of think I'm egotistical or something.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I am going to put this on as a Mindset Monday episode, because I think it'll just be a fantastic, and the reason I have the mindset episodes is for that very reason of, you can't do anything in life if your mind is in the tank. You're just in the negatives constantly. You're doing a -1, -1. Like you can't even +1 at all until you get your mind fixed. So,
oh, can I share something?
Yes, that's why I'm like, I can't say that and then not let you share something.
Well, we had a guest on Brain Dump, and so this isn't even my story; it's his story. But I thought it was really, really cool, because I've always talked about mindset's the lens through which you see the world, and if it's cracked or scuzzy, then you're not going where you need to go as quickly as you want to go. But he had it even better. He goes, your window is so dirty that you think you're just this old beat up Toyota from the 70s. He's like, but once you get your windshield clean, you're going to realize you're a Ferrari. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's true. Like, and it's cool. Like until you can get your mind right, like you can't accurately see yourself. And again, it goes back to Aristotle, the unexamined life is not worth living. So start there.
Okay, that could launch into a whole nother conversation, but I'm going to show willpower. I'm going to make a +1 choice. I don't know if it feels like a +1 though. Anyhow, audience, thank you. Listeners, I'm so grateful for you. I'm grateful that you join us for these amazing conversations, and let me know what you need in your life. Remember, just connect up with me, send me a message. Let me know what kind of content is going to serve you well, because on these mindset episodes, we can pull lots of different information in, and you're not alone. You're not a snowflake. That's just reality. You are special and important, but there are lots of things that we all struggle with and that we can improve upon. And I'd love to create content that will help you with that, or to continue your growth on your investment journey. So drop a message my way so that we can create that kind of content. Until next time, take that +1 step to the path, the life, well, maybe I'll get this right. Apparently I've been talking too much, but make that next step to find your freedom. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of Ask Me How I Know. This episode was brought to you by 3 Keys Investments. They are dedicated to helping people like you, you, my awesome listeners, develop passive income and legacy wealth through multifamily investing. Feel free to check out their website, 3keysinvestments.com, to see if there's an offering that will help your portfolio grow and meet all of your needs. If you haven't already rated, reviewed, subscribed, liked, all of those bells and whistles, I would be absolutely honored if you would do that for Ask Me How I Know. Thanks again, and go make it a great day.